All right, glad you're here this weekend. Give a shout out over to Etiwanda Gardens. Give a shout out over to Lone Hill if you would. San Dimas, give a shout out to San Dimas. Yay, San Dimas. Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. I'm going to read verse 2 and then verse 17. Don't worry, it'll be on the screen and I'll get back to it in a moment. And God spoke these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, you'll notice I started with the 10th commandment. That's not the first one. We're beginning a new series called Waze to Freedom. Now, how many of you have a Waze app? Anybody? I love this app. What man would not love to find out where he's going without having to stop and ask for directions? And I have the voice of a woman on my app. And I'll tell you why in a second. She reroutes me when traffic is backed up. I love that. She tells me about debris that's on the road. She tells you if there's a car that's on the shoulder to prevent you from having an accident. She tells you where to eat that's somewhere on the way to your ultimate destination. I mean, that's just fantastic. Actually, someone said that had the wise men been 3 wise women, they would have asked for directions, arrived on time, helped deliver the baby, cleaned the stable, made a casserole, and brought usable gifts. And I got to tell you, the voice on my app is a female voice. And I'm not sure why. I've tried to dissect that. Is it because I don't want another man telling me what to do? Or is it because I've grown accustomed to listening to the voice of my wife? In fact, for Christmas, she gave me a poster to put on my wall, and it's on my office door. It says, I only do what the voices inside my wife's head tell her to tell me to do. She gave me that for Christmas. So the bottom line with Waze is that you get to where you want to go without detours, delays. What man doesn't want that? Now listen carefully. What Waze is to driving, the 10 commandments are to mankind and to every civilization. Let me say it again. What Waze is to driving, the 10 commandments are to mankind and every civilization. If you want to arrive at your destination, aware of potential detours and dangers, enjoying the journey as best you can in this world, then you've got to listen to the voice of the ultimate app, the God app, who has chosen to reveal himself in his ways, W-A-Z-E, that ultimately lead to freedom. Now wait a minute. To get the most out of this, we have to set the series up well. And the first thing we have to do is define, what do we mean by freedom? It is not the absence of restriction. That's not what freedom means. Because sometimes your freedoms are going to conflict. You've heard me talk about this before. You cannot eat whatever you want and live to be a grandfather. I'm going to be a grandfather soon. That's why I'm watching while I'm eating. I want to be around to enjoy my grandchildren. You can't ride your bike without a helmet and not break both your arms sooner or later. But the modern definition of freedom is the ability to do whatever you want. But that definition is unworkable because life doesn't work like that. You can't say, I want to live or I want a long and happy marriage, but I also want to sleep with whoever I want to. Those are mutually exclusive ideas. You can't say, I want a good job without saying I'm going to restrict how much drinking and partying I do when I'm at college. You can't say, I want good relationships without restricting your impulses and fantasies. You can't say, I want to be a great athlete without restricting your diet and increasing your exercise. There are certain limitations that are part and parcel to the world, to your life. A livable, happy, fulfilling life includes accepting enormous constraints on your life. These are the harsh realities. You might say to yourself, well, but I choose. No, you don't. They choose you. They choose you. You must submit to them. But no one knows better than God then, if he's the creator of the world, how you can best navigate your life and get the most out of life, which is why he shows you the restrictions or the boundaries in which you are to live. And for a lot of us, we hear those two words together, boundaries, freedom, and we think those are mutually exclusive. Well, no, they're not. Let's go back to the old illustration of the sailboat. It's made to sail and to ride the wind. But you got one of two choices. You can experience the freedom of speed sailing only when you limit the boat to the proper depth of water and to face the wind in the right direction. If you violate the design, disintegration sets in almost immediately. If you try to take it into shallow water, or if you try to position the boat in relation to the wind in a way that it would cause it to capsize or to stall or stagnate or ultimately destroy it completely, you're not using the boat as it was intended to be used. If God made you, then He knows how you are intended to be used. Your body, your thoughts, your emotions, your desires, all of it. And you've heard me say this. I've said this as long as I can remember as I've been in ministry. Because someone has said to me, I don't like a God who restricts me. And I've said, well, that's because you don't understand that God, when He gives law, doesn't give it arbitrarily. He gives it because He loves you. When I tell my son Delaney not to play in the middle of the street. Now, when I was a young kid, the middle of the street was the best place to play. We played wiffle ball in the street because it's flat, the ball rolls. Miss Stover's yard was the home run boundary into the corn. It was the perfect place to play. The problem is if you play in the middle of the road, sooner or later on a busy street, you're going to get hit by a car. So you've got to learn to see the law of God is not motivated to show you that He's the big bad cosmic boss. He gives it because He loves you so much. He doesn't want you to play in the middle of the street. But what we do is we play in the middle of the street and then complain to God when our life falls apart. God, how could you? Remember what we said last week of Psalm 103, as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear, respect Him. So first, what is freedom? Before we go into this series, freedom then should be defined like this: submitting to boundaries given by God so as to not be trapped by that which diverts, destroys, or causes disintegration. Now second, why do we choose the Ten Commandments as the objective moral authority of how we should live? Why not some other Waze, W-A-Z-E? Why the Ten Commandments? You know, when Delaney, my son, was 12 years old, he saw my junior high yearbook. And without hesitation, he said, you know, I'm guessing, Dad, that most of these people in here are dead. Do you know the sad reality of our culture, folks? Anything that's remotely aged, we've written it off. My iPhone, they've slowed it down, so I'd have to buy the next one. I'm so ticked. You spend good money on something, and they want you to update it. You do, and it slows down. That's right. Professors today, not all, but professors, generally speaking, will not use a textbook that's more than 4 years old, even if the textbook is about ancient history. And people say, how dare we suggest that we follow laws that are thousands of years old, even though those very laws have shaped our culture. Cecil B. DeMille, I don't know if you know that name, but at the New York opening of his epic film entitled The Ten Commandments, starring Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner, he stated, the Ten Commandments are not the laws. The Ten Commandments are the laws. And he was so determined to make this film that he basically gave his own life. Because while they were filming on location in Egypt, he was 75 years old. He climbed to the top of a 107-foot ladder to shoot the famous scene, the Exodus scene from atop this massive Per Ramses set. In the intense heat, he suffered a heart attack, ultimately from which he never recovered. He died January 21st, 1959. Let me read to you part of his speech, and I've quoted it for you in New York. Man has made 32 million laws since the Ten Commandments were handed down to Moses on Mount Sinai, more than 3,000 years ago, but never improved on God's law. The Ten Commandments are the principles by which man may live with God and man may live with man. They are the expressions of the mind of God for His creatures. They are the charter and the guide of human liberty, for there can be no liberty without law. He goes on to say that what he had hoped, that when people come to see the Ten Commandments, that they would be filled with the sight of this big spectacle, but they would also be filled with the Spirit of truth. That somehow when they watch the movie, they would have a better understanding of the real meaning of this pattern of life, the Ten Commandments, that God has set down for us to follow. You say, okay, Jeff, I hear you, but you still haven't answered the question, why the 10 Commandments? Why should that be the objective moral law, the boundaries in which we should live? 2 short answers. Stay with me. Number 1, Jesus said that heaven and earth would pass away, but the law would not. In Matthew 5:17, for I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. If you think about what Jesus is saying, that is an amazing statement. Look at something like Mount Everest. It's the tallest mountain in the world. It soars almost 5.5 miles into the sky. And the end of it actually pierces the jet stream at the iconic summit. Scientists tell us it's 60 million years old. Jesus said that those mountains will pass away long before the law does, because the law is eternal, the mountains are not. This is the reason that many of the founding fathers of the United States of America said that there was a direct correlation between the success of a nation and the 10 Commandments. A couple of years ago, I'm ashamed to admit this, I made my first trip to Washington, D.C. Now, I've been to Fairfax, Virginia, but I'd never been to the Capitol. But some friends of mine, the McMahons, the Hancocks, and then my wife and I, visited the Capitol. We got the luxury of a few tours. Let me describe something for you that I didn't know. As you walk up the steps to the very building that houses the U.S. Supreme Court, right at the top, near the top of the building, is a row of world lawgivers. And each one is facing the guy in the middle who has a full frontal view. And he is Moses holding the 10 Commandments. The idea is that all laws are derivatives of the 10 Commandments, the law of Moses. As you enter into the Supreme Court, which they won't let you take photos, the 2 huge oak doors that guard the room on the lower portion list the 10 Commandments. As you sit inside the courtroom, you can see a wall right above where the Supreme Court justices sit. And on that wall is the 10 Commandments. And there are Bible verses etched in stone throughout almost every monument within Washington, D.C. James Madison, the 4th president, the father of the Constitution, said this: we have staked the whole of our political institutions upon the capacity of mankind for self-government, upon the capacity of each and all of us to govern ourselves, to control ourselves, to sustain ourselves according to the 10 Commandments of God. What's he saying? He's basically saying you cannot legislate morality. You can't force people to be good. The law is useless unless people's hearts have been changed by the law of God. Now there's something else. The lowest respect for the Bible came somewhere between the 18th and 19th centuries, when some of the world's greatest minds were trying to cast off the straitjackets of the Dark Ages. During that season, the view of the Bible, and this is a whole sermon in and of itself, it was believed that the Bible was just a mass of old wives' tales. And Moses was much like Apollo, just an invention, and there's no such historical happening as the Exodus from Egypt, nor any of the other events that actually occurred. That was the belief. But then there was a problem. The science of archaeology arose. And we discovered that all the history of the Eastern Mediterranean civilization in the Bible is accurate. That we have in hand a substantial corroboration of the main points of the Jewish national narrative. What does that mean? It all happened. Moses, 10 Commandments, the descendants of Abraham conquering Canaan, the rise and fall of the Hebrew monarchy. In fact, no serious thinker today even questions these things anymore. The Israelites descended from a small nation which came about from the Sinai desert into Canaan 3,000 years ago with the tradition of liberation from Egypt under a lawgiver and a deliverer by the name of Moses. No serious thinker questions those facts. You know what historians do, however? They can't believe that the Jews actually still exist. Historians think that one of the secrets of humanity is that the people called the people of God are still around. because of how many times they've been in captivity, because they were farmers, not warriors, because they were often dispersed, and they lay claim to a very small piece of land in the Middle East. Someone once wrote, "How odd of God to choose the Jews." And now historians are starting to use even the word miraculous. Now, you and I believe that they are here because they are the chosen of God. What does that mean exactly? Well, it means that God wanted to model to all human history what it's like to have a relationship with Him and what He requires from His people. So He personally related to the Hebrews. He gave them the law. They were responsible for it, but He gave them the law so that all of humanity would know it. And here's what we do know by respected historians. When the Israelites followed the commands of the 10 Commandments, their nation and economy thrived. When they disobeyed, it began to unravel and dissipate. When they obeyed, God blessed. When they disobeyed, they began to unravel not only individually, but politically, economically, as a nation. Which brings us to the question, why do we keep the 10 Commandments? Why do we say that we should? Because we believe they're from God. We believe they are the way to peace and freedom. We believe that they prevent disintegration of the soul and counter things like anxiety and depression and many other mental illnesses. We believe that God has compassion on those who fear Him. We believe there's a connection between obedience and blessing. And finally, we believe that one day these 10 Commandments, these laws of God, will bring everlasting peace and will be the governing authority of the kingdom that is to come. So now, that's why we begin with the 10th commandment. Because the 10th commandment is really the first commandment put into psychological terms. The 10th commandment is really the first commandment put into psychological terms. What's the first commandment? You'll have no other gods before you. The second reason we start with the 10th commandment is it's a perfect example of what we say the commandments do. We believe they're the way to peace and freedom, that they will prevent disintegration of the soul, anxiety, depression, and many other mental illnesses. What does Commandment 10 say? It says this: you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servants, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, folks, when we go through these commandments, I believe your eyes are going to be open to a lot of stuff. But you have to go in knowing they're not given arbitrarily. God loves you. You live within those confines. It's an incredible freedom. You get outside of them, they're going to destroy you from the inside out. We see that in people and in nations. So back to the sermon. What is coveting? And second, why does it restrict or trap or cause disintegration? What is coveting? And what do you mean, Pastor Jeff? That it's a psychological explanation of the first commandment, have no other gods before you. Here's what coveting is. Coveting is when you place so much value on something that you believe you cannot live without it. It's not simply just wanting something. That can be desire. But it's when you want something so bad that you think if you don't get it, you can't live. You believe that that thing will make you, sustain you, give you meaning and purpose and hope. So that you say, I've got to get the girl. I've got to get the job. I got to get that house. I got to get that car. I got to get their respect. I got to get their approval. I've got to get that thing or I will die. At that moment, that thing becomes your God. And you've broken the first commandment as well. When if you don't have the career that you want, the marriage that you want, the money that you want, the sex that you want, the influence that you want, the peer approval, the love, your favorite sports team, if it doesn't win and you think you can't live. Whatever you think you can't live without, that depresses you so, whatever you start pursuing, that you pursue more than God, that you have to lie to yourself to tell you that you're not pursuing it more than God, but right now that thing's entering your mind, that becomes your God. Think about it. What is a false God? That which you worship Worship is just a word that means ultimate worth. It's what you give ultimate worth to. So if you have to choose between the two, you choose this. For some of you, if you have to choose money and doing things ethically, which one are you going to choose? You're going to choose your God. That which you serve. What drives you? What causes you to get up in the morning? What are you passionate about? That's your God. That's what you serve. It's what you obey. Whatever it requires, you give it. And you attach your identity to it. I see this all the time, especially in us guys. You see them. They're walking around. I see them at the golf course mostly. They're walking around, all the right equipment, all the right clothing, driving the right car, got their chin up in the air, and basically their identity and significance is tied to what other people think about them. So they spend their entire life trying to prove to everybody how much money they have and how much stuff they have, and that's where they get their approval. It's not only the wealthy that do that. We all do that. Scottie Pippen, this is one of my favorite stories. There was a feature article in Sports Illustrated on the Trailblazers, Portland Trailblazers, when he was in Portland. December 13th, 1999, there's an article called No Babes in the Woods. The article was about how poor Scottie Pippen was before he became a Chicago Bull, before he went to high school and played basketball. But by the time he was playing for Portland, he was making $14.7 million a year. $45 million in 3 years, with endorsements that included $50 million. He owned a 74-foot yacht and a $100,000 Mercedes. Okay? So the reporter asked Scottie Pippen, what do you think about before the game? I want you to listen to these words. These are the words of Scottie Pippen. Before every game in Portland's Rose Garden, I only have eyes for one. I'll let my gaze drift over to the courtside seat occupied by Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft and owner of both the Trailblazers and the Seattle Seahawks, a man with a personal net worth of $40 billion. I look at his geeky exterior and I wonder, how does he do it? Tell me how I can make $1 billion. I just want one of them. Tell me how I can make $1 billion. Tell me how I can become a billionaire. Now hold on a second. Dude, you got 95 million. But it's not about the money. It's not about the money, is it? C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity says this. He says, pride, real pride gets no pleasure out of having something. Pride only gets pleasure out of having more of it than the next person. You may think you're proud of being successful, intelligent, or good-looking, but when surrounded by those who are equal or better than you, you lose all pleasure in those things. It's the comparison that makes you proud. It's the comparison that you are above the rest. In other words, if you're a wealthy man and all of a sudden you find yourself in a circle where everybody's more wealthy than you are, guess what happens? You get depressed. If you're a good golfer and all of a sudden you get placed in a foursome on the weekend and all three are better than you, guess what? If that's your identity, you'll get depressed. If you think you're handsome and beautiful, but somehow you find yourself at a party and you know you're the ugliest one there, and you've attached yourself to how beautiful and wonderful you are, guess what? You're going to get depressed. Because that thing is your God. The relationship between serving other gods and coveting, wanting more of a good thing for a bad reason, those two are inseparable. But you know what? Here's the sad thing. This is where God's arbitrary law comes in. These things that you're after, you're not after them, man. They're after you. You think if I could only get this, hey, it's got you. It's ruining your life because you'll never get there. And you'll spend your whole life pursuing something that even if you were by awesome chance to get it, you're going to see how empty it really is. These are not your friends. These things are your enemies. And they're never going to deliver what you hope they will. Now, I'm not saying they won't make you feel good at great. Heroin makes you feel good the first time, but eventually it's going to kill you. Not that I would know. I've just read books. Stay with me, please. Psychologically, idols are the things that give you meaning and significance. You attach yourself to them in an illegitimate fashion, psychologically. Sociologically, idols are the things that give you credibility. The things that you think you have or that you try to possess that will then cause you to be valued and adored by the people that you respect. But there's also theological idolatry. And that's when you feel accepted in the eyes of God because of how good you are, or how much Bible you know, or how many weekends a year that you offer in service for the poor. So first, what is coveting? It's pursuing something more than you pursue God in hopes that it can deliver something that only God can deliver. Everybody has a life's lie. Everybody has a life's lie. What's your life's lie? Here's your life's lie. It's the thing that you think if you get it, everything's going to be fine now. That's your life's lie. Everybody in the room has one. I do, you do, we do. In the human flesh, we fight against it. Second, okay, we dealt with the first part. Second, how does coveting impact the individual and society? How does not coveting preserve the person and the culture? How does coveting cause death and disintegration? Now, some of you will remember the name Kurt Cobain. I'm getting a little older and I'm sharing my age now, but there was a band in the day called Nirvana. This dude had everything. He was kind of like the modern day Guido Maupassant, and I'll talk about him just in a moment. You don't know who that is either. Wow, but he's really old. You know, when he died, I remember I was a youth pastor at the time, and one of my youth asked me, why did he kill himself? He had everything. He was good looking, had all money in the world. I mean, why did he kill himself? And then the guy said, I said, well, why do you think? And he said, well, I think so because he didn't have God. The problem with that is there's a lot of people who don't have God that don't kill themselves, right? Now listen, this is where the crunch time comes, and you're doing well. I'm so proud of you so far. This is important. In ministry, you learn that there are two situations in which people seem to want to kill themselves. Now, I do not want to make suicide simplistic. But if I had to gather them into two categories, there are usually two situations in which people seem to want to kill themselves, other than just strict mental illness, okay? We have our life's lie, and we're pursuing it hard. And then one day, we discover something clicks. I'm never going to get that. I'm not going to get that. It's somewhat similar to me going to a Continental Basketball League tryout and suddenly realizing that I've been a big fish in a very small pond. Now, at that point, I had to choose. Some people, when they get to the point and they realize, I have no chance of ever getting this thing that I thought I had to have to live, and they can't live anymore. But the second group of people who seem to want to kill themselves is the people who get all the way there. They actually get it all and it didn't deliver. Remember that quote I gave you a few years ago by Cynthia Heimel in The Village Voice? I got this from Dr. Tim Keller in his book. This is a great quote. He says, I think when God wants to play a really rotten practical joke on you, He grants you your deepest wish and then laughs merrily when you realize you want to kill yourself. What does she mean? God says, okay, if you think that's what's going to make you happy, here you go. And let me stand back and watch you now. Now here's the problem. This is where we haven't gone. Most of us in this room never get to that place where our hopes are utterly dashed. We get just enough of our dream that keeps us alive chasing it. Which means as a result, most of us live lives of an illusion. We stay in that category. We've never really been to the point where we have seen all of a sudden that it cannot satisfy. So we're middle of the road people. Most of us in the room are middle of the road people, which means that most of us remain coveters. Because we still believe if we can get there, we're going to have everything that we've ever wanted. We're going to be happy. Someone said, you're only young once, but you can be immature forever. And that's a lot of us. Now, let me take you around third. Stay with me. You've done so well. Here's what coveting does. And it's why God says, don't do it, man. Don't do it. You're expecting something to give you that cannot deliver. When people don't get what it is they think that is going to change everything and they're going to be happy all of a sudden, you respond one of four ways. One of four ways. Number one, you blame the things. Right? You say, the reason I'm unhappy is because I need a better spouse. That's my problem. I need a better figure. I need a better career. I need a nose job. I need better friends. I need a better church. I need a better city. I need better kids. So if I can just get some new stuff and new people in my life, I can move on to new horizons. And I got to hurry because I've lost time. Have you ever met someone like this? It's the guy who leaves his wife just like that. It's the wife who leaves the husband and the kids just like that. They become driven and anxious, and they become totally afraid to commit to anything after that. Oh, I love it. I don't love it. But on the weekend, I see people come to church like this. You can tell who they are because they evenly distribute their weight in the chair, and they sit toward the back in case they need to be ready to move. Because as soon as they think, okay, this is not going to help me get my thing, I'm out of here. You with me? So I don't settle down anywhere for too long because I could be wrong and I've wasted more time. They're like Daniel Boone. As soon as you think this little piece of ground is not going to give you the nirvana that you thought it would, you move on. People like this discard people all the time because they use people as a means to their end. They step on people. They don't care who they step on. There's carnage everywhere around them because they believe the whole problem is things. They discard their friends, their jobs, their geographical location. They pick up and move. If it's not city to city, it's church to church or community to community or friends to friends or club to club because they're convinced that they're not the common denominator in all their problems. This makes for a pretty unstable life. Now let me just take a time out here since I have time. And I want you to be very careful how you translate or interpret this, okay? This is the problem in our country right now. If we're not careful, and this is no statement about the past president or the current president or the past politicians or the president. This is a general statement, okay? So I would make this no matter who's in office. The problem is that if we're not careful, we Americans are going to allow people who think they can't live without money or power destroy our country. What do you mean by that? Having grown up in this country and seen how we've operated, I believe we're at a time when we're making policies that we no longer care if it's good for people of the country. We only care if it will get us elected. If you start operating like that because you're so hungry for money and power and you become so narcissistic, it will be difficult for a country and a people not to disintegrate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm running for junior high president. I'm in junior high school and I'm running for class president, and my campaign promise is this. Okay, junior high students, I think we have far too much class and far too little recreation. So we're going to 50-50 it down. You elect me as the junior high class president, and we're going to have 4 hours of recess and 4 hours of class. Do you think he will get elected? If it's left up to the students, probably. Is it the best thing? No. So when it comes to the point where you'll say whatever you need to say to get elected because you covet money and power, that's when disintegration begins. You have to have an ultimate point of reference for the decisions that you make. Coveting is the explanation for Enron, Ponzi schemes, every scam that has ever emerged, and the destruction of the individual and society. So number one, you can blame things. If I can just change my things, man, then life will be good. The problem is you're the ultimate narcissist and you're leaving carnage wherever you go. Or two, you can blame yourself. You can blame yourself to an unhealthy degree. So, I'm not saying it's not good to look inside and see what's going on. The problem is, if you blame yourself, you start looking around at all the press releases and you start believing the good about everybody else. Now, let me explain this for a moment. My friend Ravi Zacharias says, how we place a halo around the head of the unrealized. Can I give you a news flash for a moment? Other people do not want you to see their emptiness and struggles because they don't want your pity, they want your worship. So it's easy to look around and assume that everybody's life's going good except yours. But it's because people don't tell you what's really happening. You automatically assume that yours is the only life that isn't going well. So you think, I'm a loser. There's something wrong with me. And so you really want to take an in-depth look. And suddenly you say to yourself, perhaps I'm even disturbed. Maybe I'm disturbed. Everyone else is getting what they want except for me. So you start going to counseling. Counseling's not a bad thing. It's good to take a good look at who you are. However, it can also be a red herring. It could be that the real reason you're unhappy is deeper than mere psychology. Again, let's go back to something Tim Keller talks about in his reading of Ernest Becker. Ernest Becker says, all the psychoanalysis in the world does not allow a person to find out who he is, why he's on earth, why he has to die, and how he can make life a triumph. And it is when psychology pretends to do this, when it pretends to offer a full explanation of human happiness, that it becomes a fraud and creates an impasse from which you cannot escape. What does he mean? Becker's not a Christian. What's he saying? Now, he did not say that a psychologist cannot tell you these things. He said the science of psychology cannot tell you these things. What does he mean? Science is not built to tell you what ought to be. As a matter of right and wrong, science doesn't deal with right and wrong. And it could be the reason you're unhappy is that you don't know why you're here. You don't know for what or for whom you were built. So you have no ultimate point of reference. You can't deal with guilt and regret or death because you have no idea of origin, meaning, morality, destiny. No science can answer those questions. A psychologist can look at you and say, you shouldn't feel guilty and you shouldn't feel bad because you're not worthless. Well, you can say that, but as soon as they say, how do you know? And you start giving them proof, you've moved away from science and psychology into religion. Your real problem is that you've not answered the bigger questions of your life. That you are coveting and pursuing things that are never going to give you what you think they're going to give you. So one, stay with me, you can lie, you can blame things, you can blame yourself to an unhealthy degree. If you blame things, you're going to climb over people. You're going to hurt everybody across the path. What's the old song? Climb every mountain, ford every stream. You're going to climb every person and ford every person until you find your dream. Or you can blame yourself and say, I'm inadequate, I'm disturbed, everybody else is doing well, but I'm a loser. Or third, you can blame the universe. People do this all the time. I'm sick and tired of living in this world. It stinks, man. I've tried to get in the right circles. I'm rejected. I tried to get the right job. I tried to make enough money. I tried to live in the right community. Things don't work out for me. This universe stinks. I'm going to trust nothing now. I'm going to give myself to nothing. I'm going to destroy all of my dreams. I'll never be disappointed again. That's like saying because I don't like the smell, I'm going to cut off my nose. Because I did not like getting my heart broken, I'm going to be stone cold. And what they end up doing, people who blame it all on the universe, they end up killing their own humanity. And the part of them that's able to aspire to noble things, great things, high things, becomes cynic. Have you ever met a cynical person? They're like porcupines, man. Nobody wants to be around them. You can blame things. You can blame yourself. You can blame the universe. Or you can blame your relationship with God. You can blame things. You can blame yourself. You can blame the universe. Or you can blame your relationship with God. You can look at your life and say, it's been so long since I've been really happy. Matter of fact, I've never been that happy. I've tried every avenue. You've gotten just enough of your dream and goal to keep your appetite whet. You keep pursuing, but it's just not working. And you can be honest with yourself and say, you know what, maybe it's not things, maybe it's not the universe, maybe it's not me, maybe it's just the reality that there's this God who has made me for a relationship, and I have not yet plumbed the depths of God. I've not even scratched the surface. I mentioned Gita Maupassant a few minutes ago. He was talented, man. He was a writer of short stories. Within 10 years, he rose from obscurity to fame. He had a yacht in the Mediterranean, a large house on the Norman coast, a luxurious flat in Paris. One author described Maupassant, he's kind of like the Brad Pitt of his day in his looks, but also he was like the Bill Gates. He was brilliant. It was written about him, critics praised him, men admired him, and women worshiped him. That's kind of the things they say about Dane Johnson. Critics praised him, men admired him, women worshiped him. That's Dane Johnson. And yet at the height of his fame and wealth, he went insane. On New Year's Day, 1892, he tried to cut his own throat with a knife. He was taken to the hospital, into a private asylum on the Riviera. After 18 months of physical debilitation and gibbering insanity, he died. He was 42 years old. He had already written his own epitaph. He said, I've coveted everything and taken pleasure in nothing. But most of you will never get to the point where you've realized that everything you've been looking for, searching for, when you find it, you're still empty. Because you cannot fill an eternal void by temporary means. Now stay with me, this is the end. C.S. Lewis says that creatures are born with desires that unless there is a fulfillment to that desire, the desire doesn't exist. A baby wants food because food exists. A duckling wants to swim because water exists. We want sex because sex exists. And then he says in that famous statement, if I find in myself desires that no experience in this world can satisfy, the only probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Now listen. If you try to get something out of stuff, whatever it is, you're going to be so frustrated and depressed and filled with anxiety. And the reason is because God loves you and does not want you to settle for that. Now here's the problem. You say, well, Pastor Jeff, what's the answer? Okay, I got it, that when we pursue the things that will never fulfill us, that it causes society to disintegrate because we're power, money hungry, it causes my soul to disintegrate because it's not going to fill me up the way that it's meant to fill me, and there's this God. But to tell you the truth, Pastor Jeff, I've been coming to church for years. Now listen, this is careful. I've been coming to church for years, and I've heard all you pastors say something like that. You say to us, you got to learn to commune with God. Pastor Jeff, I have no idea what you're talking about. Pastors will say, you got to find your deep inner needs and contentment in God. Okay, thanks, Pastor Jeff. How? You say, the only way you're going to stop coveting is to feel the presence of God and to get everything you're looking for out of Him. Well, that's great. How? Pastor Jeff says, I need to meet with God every day and God will reveal Himself to me. Well, that's not my experience, Pastor Jeff. I tried to meet with Him. I don't feel nothing. Okay. I've always wanted to say this and never been able to. 30 years of ministry, this is what it's told me. I can't help you until you have a hunger for God. But I can't give that to you either. Which has led me to believe this. Every conversion story. There's a guy that was an atheist not too long ago that serves and I think operates our men's ministry at Etiwanda Gardens. Amazing story. God's going to have to break you. See, I can't help you until something inside you wants with all your heart and soul and mind to pursue God. But you'll never do that by me telling you to. You'll only do it when your life falls apart and you have nowhere else to turn. So I struggle. What do I pray for the people God has called me to? Do I pray that all of their lives just are turned upside down? See, even the Apostle Paul had to have a road to Damascus experience. And so will you at some point in your life. Otherwise, you're going to live between pursuit and gain. And you're just going to be frustrated and empty all your life. And the only way that's going to change is if something happens in you to make you realize there is an imperishable bliss. That all the good things you experience in your life, the problem with them is that you know they're going to end. That's why I have a hard time enjoying vacation. Think about it. Think about it. You go to vacation. 3 days in, you finally settle down. And the next thought is, I leave in 4 days. Come on. Come on. You spend all this time looking forward to it. By the time you stop, I'm having a good time, you realize, I got to go in 4 days. Until you know that there's an eternal bliss that does not end, that it's found in your relationship with God, it doesn't matter what I say. So here's the only answer I can give you to not coveting. so as not to cause disintegration in your soul and the people around you. You've got to beg Jesus to give you a passion for God. You have to ask Him, and then you have to stand back and trust that the events of your life in the coming days are so that you will stop putting your trust in things that can never deliver. That's it. I can tell you to pursue God and get a devotional book and go to Rooted, and all those are good things. Yeah, they're all good things, and you should do them. But you'll quit until there's something deep inside that happens where you want to know God. That's why Jesus narrowed all the commandments down to one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. He narrowed them all down to one. Because if you're doing that, all these other 9 will not happen. They're a byproduct of you loving and seeking and searching God. And that's only the 10th one. My goodness, what's going to happen next week? Father, thank you for the power of your word. Thank you for your goodness and for the way that you speak to our lives. I pray a prayer for my brothers and sisters right now. I pray that there would be a moving of your spirit in this room. I pray that there would be a calling out, God, please, give me a passion, give me faith. Give me something, do something in my heart that would cause me to want to know you more than I want to know anything else, to seek you more than I seek anything else, to know that all these beautiful things that I experience, it's kind of like icing on the cake, but ultimately it's just icing. Help me to seek that which is eternal, an unending bliss. Cause something to happen in our hearts that only you can cause, that suddenly we would drop to our knees and say, God, you know what? I've built my business. I've achieved my goal in sports. I've done these things, but I'm empty. God, I know I should seek you, but I just don't feel like it. So would you give me the passion for you that I ought to have so that I can live the life that I've been called to live in Christ's name. Amen.